In the middle of a crowded office on a Friday morning in March, Diana Reed stood beside Marcus Sullivan's desk with a tin of homemade cookies in her hands. 300 employees worked in the open floor plan around them, and at least 50 had stopped what they were doing to watch. Tyler Jenkins leaned back in his chair 2 desks over, grinning like he'd just discovered gold. Tyler's voice carried across the sudden quiet. "Boss, you better be careful with this one. Marcus here is perfect husband material. Single dad, responsible, never complains about anything." The laughter started small, a few chuckles from nearby cubicles. Then it spread like fire through dry grass. Someone whistled. Another person clapped twice. Diana felt the energy shift, felt the moment turn into something playful and harmless, the kind of office banter that would be forgotten by lunch. She turned toward Marcus, the tin still balanced in one hand. Her mouth opened before her brain caught up. "So Marcus, what do you say? Will you marry me?" The laughter exploded. Applause broke out near the windows. Someone shouted something about finally seeing the CEO loosen up. The noise filled every corner of the third floor, bouncing off glass walls and polished concrete floors. Marcus didn't laugh. He looked up from his spreadsheet, and his eyes met hers with a steadiness that didn't belong in a moment like this. His expression carried weight. Not embarrassment, not humor, just something quiet and certain. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, the kind that came from a man who had survived worse things than workplace jokes. His voice cut through the noise, soft but clear. "What if I say yes?" The laughter died like someone had flipped a switch. The applause stuttered and stopped. Heads turned, eyes widened. Diana's grin faltered, her lips parting as if to say something clever to pull the moment back into safe territory, but nothing came. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. His face showed no hint of performance, no wink to let her in on the joke. She realized with sudden clarity that he hadn't treated her question like a joke at all. He treated it like something real. Someone coughed, the spell fractured. Coworkers turned back to their screens, the hum of conversation rebuilding itself keystroke by keystroke. Diana cleared her perfume, took half a step backward. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Enjoy the cookies." She moved past his desk, but as she did, she leaned in close enough that only he could hear. "I don't make empty gestures, Marcus. Think about it and give me a real answer someday." Then she walked away, back straight, heels clicking against the floor with this kind of precision that came from years of controlling every visible emotion. Behind her, Marcus sat motionless, staring at the tin of cookies. His co-workers had already returned to their work. The moment filed away as another quirky CEO interaction. But Marcus knew better. He opened the tin. The cookies were still warm. He took one, bit into it, and thought about what she'd said. Not the question, but the part after. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus Sullivan arrived at Tech Vantage Solutions every morning at 7:45. Not because anyone expected it, not because his contract required it, but because those 30 minutes before the office filled with voices gave him space to breathe. He made coffee in the small break room on the third floor, the kind that came from a bag and tasted like burnt wood. But it was hot, and it was free, and it kept him awake. While it brewed, he pulled up his project pipeline on his laptop, scanned the status updates from overnight emails, checked his phone for messages from Rosa. Rosa Delgado had been watching Sophie for 3 years, ever since Marcus moved to Portland and took the project manager job. She sent him updates throughout the day, photos of Sophie eating lunch, videos of her singing songs from preschool, texts that read, "She's fine, stop worrying." Marcus worried anyway. It was the only thing he knew how to do with the hollow space in his chest that used to hold certainty. By the time his team filtered in around 8:15, Marcus had already cleared his inbox and started work on the first critical task. He didn't chat by the coffee machine. He didn't ask about anyone's weekend. He kept his head down and his hands moving because motion was easier than stillness, and stillness brought questions he couldn't answer. At 5 o'clock, he closed his laptop, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. No drinks after work, no extended meetings about synergy or bandwidth, no standing around discussing the Blazers' playoff chance, or speculating about who was sleeping with whom in accounting. His co-workers understood. They'd learned not to take it personally. Single dad, 4-year-old daughter. The math was simple. They teased him sometimes, Light jabs about being the office Boy Scout, about never breaking the rules or cutting corners. He took it with the same quiet acceptance he applied to everything else. What they saw as virtue was really just exhaustion, dressed up to look like character. Marcus was 32 years old. He'd been a project manager for 3 years, working his way up from junior analyst through sheer persistence and an ability to solve problems other people found too complicated or too boring. Before Portland, he'd lived in Seattle with Rebecca. They'd married when he was 26, young but certain, the kind of certainty that came from knowing someone since college and believing that love could carry you through anything. Sophie had been 6 months old when the drunk driver crossed the median on I-5 and hit their car head-on. The impact crushed the driver's side. Rebecca died before the ambulance arrived. Marcus walked away with a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Sophie, strapped in her rear-facing car seat, screamed for 2 hours straight but didn't have a scratch on her. The man who killed Rebecca served 18 months in county jail. Marcus attended the sentencing hearing but didn't speak. What was there to say? No words would bring her back. No amount of punishment would fill the empty side of the bed or answer Sophie's questions about why mommy only existed in photographs. So Marcus stopped talking about it. When people at work asked about his wife, he gave short answers and changed the subject. When Sophie asked about her mother, he showed her pictures and told her stories. But he kept his own grief locked away where it couldn't interfere with the tasks that mattered. Paying rent, buying groceries, making sure Sophie felt safe. Grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. Sophie needed a father who showed up, not one who fell apart. His desk sat near the windows on the 3rd floor, facing east, so the morning light hit his screen at an angle that made spreadsheets harder to read. He kept the space clean. A laptop, a coffee mug, a small framed photo of Sophie holding a stuffed elephant she'd named Mr. Trunks. No personal items beyond that. No motivational quotes or family vacation snapshots. Just the essentials. The photo had been taken last summer at the Portland Children's Museum. Sophie wore a yellow sundress and her hair in pigtails, her smile showing the gap where she'd lost her first tooth. Marcus looked at it every morning when he sat down, a reminder of why the rest of it mattered. Diana Reed became CEO of Tech Vantage Solutions 3 months before the birthday incident. She was 35, sharp-featured, deliberate in her movements. The previous CEO had been a man named Harold Brennan, who spent most of his time in the glass corner office on the 4th floor, emerging only for quarterly all-hands meetings where he talked about growth metrics and market penetration while everyone pretended to care. Diana was different from the first day. She walked the floors. She sat in on team meetings without warning, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook that never left her side. She stayed late, sometimes until 9 or 10 at night, reading performance reports and cross-referencing names with project outcomes. People whispered about it in the break rooms, trying to figure out if she was looking for people to fire or people to promote. One name appeared in her notes more than any other: Marcus Sullivan. He handled the projects no one else wanted, the ones with impossible deadlines and angry clients, the ones where the budget had already been cut twice and expectations somehow kept rising. He delivered every time. Clean handoffs, thorough documentation, zero drama. But he never showed up at the award ceremonies, never attended the quarterly celebrations where Harold used to give out plaques and gift cards. He was always the first to leave. Diana noticed him during a meeting at the end of the previous quarter. A major client project had fallen 2 weeks behind schedule and was spiraling into disaster. The conference room felt like a pressure cooker. 20 people packed around a table, voices rising, fingers pointing. The client had threatened to pull the contract. The VP of operations was sweating through his shirt. Everyone was looking for someone to blame. Marcus sat near the end of the table, silent until the VP turned to him directly. The VP's frustration came through in clipped syllables. "Marcus, you're the PM on this. What the hell happened?" Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't deflect or make excuses. He opened his laptop, pulled up a timeline, and projected it onto the screen. His voice stayed level. 3 things went wrong. First, the initial scope was underestimated by about 30%. That's on me. I should have pushed back harder during planning. Second, we lost a key developer to the Thompson project mid-sprint. That was a resource allocation decision above my level, but it cost us a week. Third, the client changed requirements twice without adjusting the deadline. Someone at the table started to interrupt, but Marcus kept going. Here's the recovery plan. 1. We reprioritize features into must-have and nice-to-have categories. 2. I moved 2 developers from lower priority work onto this project for the next 10 days. 3. I schedule a call with the client tomorrow morning to walk them through the revised timeline and get written approval on the scope changes. He paused, meeting the VP's eyes. I'll take responsibility for the initial estimate being off. That's mine. But when Peterson tried to throw the dev team under the bus in last week's stand-up, I shut it down because they executed exactly what I asked them to. The plan was flawed, not the execution. The room went quiet. The VP nodded slowly. The client services director made a note. Someone asked about backup resources, and Marcus had an answer ready. Diana watched the entire exchange from her seat near the door. She'd come to observe, not participate, wanting to see how the team handled pressure. What she saw was a man who didn't perform. He just solved the problem, claimed the parts that were his fault, and protected the people who trusted him to lead. A week later, the project was back on track. The client signed off on the new timeline. The VP sent a company-wide email praising the team's recovery without mentioning Marcus by name, which seemed about right given how these things usually worked. Diana filed it away. Marcus Sullivan, 32 years old, project manager, single father, reliable to the point of invisibility. She started paying attention after that. Not obviously, she didn't single him out or ask about him directly, but she noticed patterns. When a project hit turbulence, Marcus was the one people called. When someone needed to handle a difficult client, they tagged Marcus. When deadlines slipped and panic set in, Marcus showed up with a plan and a timeline and zero ego. And then, every day at 5 o'clock, he left. It happened 2 weeks before the birthday incident. Diana was working late on a financial forecast that the board wanted by Friday morning, the kind of detail work that required silence and focus. She'd sent her assistant home at 6. By 9, the 4th floor was empty except for her. She needed a file from the 3rd floor server room, so she took the stairs down, her heels echoing in the concrete stairwell. The 3rd floor should have been dark. It wasn't. A light glowed from one of the small conference rooms near the windows. Diana moved quietly, years of corporate survival teaching her when to observe before engaging. She stopped outside the door, looked through the glass panel. Marcus sat alone at the long table, laptop open in front of him, phone propped against a coffee mug. On the phone screen, a little girl in pink pajamas sat cross-legged on a bed, clutching a stuffed elephant. The girl was talking, her voice high and sleepy, animated in the way only small children manage when they're trying to stay awake past bedtime. Marcus typed with one hand, nodding along to whatever she was saying. Then his fingers stopped moving, and he leaned closer to the screen. His voice carried through the door, gentle but firm. "Yes, sweetheart, Daddy's almost done. No, you brush your teeth first. I'll read the story when I get home." The girl pouted, her bottom lip pushing out in exaggerated protest. Marcus smiled, barely, just a softening around his eyes, and the girl eventually nodded. He said goodnight, ended the call, then sat back in his chair and rubbed both hands over his face. The exhaustion showed then, the weight he carried, visible for just a moment before he straightened, took a breath, and went back to typing. Diana stood there longer than she intended. Something about the scene stopped her. This young man handling a work crisis while coaxing his daughter to brush her teeth, managing 2 worlds at once with no backup and no complaints. She'd seen hundreds of employees work late over the years. She'd worked plenty of late nights herself, climbing from analyst to senior analyst to manager to VP to CEO, sacrificing sleep and weekends in any semblance of a personal life to get here. But she'd never seen someone carry this much alone and still be gentle. She walked away without knocking, without letting him know she'd witnessed anything, but the image stayed with her. That night, in her downtown condo with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture that still felt like someone else's life, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, she pulled Marcus's employee file. The details were sparse. Age, 32, position, project manager, 3 years with the company. Education, bachelor's degree in business administration from Portland State. Marital status, widowed. Emergency contact, Rosa Delgado listed as babysitter. Performance reviews glowed. Consistently excellent. No complaints. No disciplinary issues. His previous manager had added a note at the bottom of the most recent review. Most reliable PM we have. Never takes credit. Always delivers. Another note, this one from HR. Single father, full custody of child. Requests schedule flexibility for childcare appointments. Always makes up time. Diana leaned back in her chair, staring at the photo attached to the file. A professional headshot from when he'd first started. Younger looking, less worn around the edges. She thought about the man in the conference room at 9 at night, balancing spreadsheets and bedtime stories. Steady, reliable, and completely alone. She closed the file, but the thought didn't leave her. That evening, Diana went home and did something she hadn't done in years. She baked. Back in graduate school, when she'd been surviving on scholarships and 3 part-time jobs, she used to bake small batches of cookies or muffins to bring to study groups. It made the late nights feel less impersonal than store-bought snacks, gave her hands something to do while her brain processed case studies and financial models. She'd grown up in a house where money was tight. Her parents both taught at a public high school in Minnesota, raising 3 kids on a combined salary of $45,000 a year. Homemade food had been a necessity, but it had also been an expression of care when there wasn't money for much else. 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder had buried those habits. Takeout was faster, meal delivery services were convenient. Her kitchen existed mostly as a staging area for coffee and wine. But that night she pulled out mixing bowls and measuring cups she'd bought when she moved into the condo and never used. She found a recipe online for chocolate chip cookies, the kind with brown butter and sea salt, and started measuring flour. The rhythm came back slowly, creaming butter and sugar, folding in chocolate chips, shaping dough into rounds on a baking sheet. While the first batch baked, she sat at her kitchen counter and wondered what she was doing. This wasn't appropriate. He was an employee. She was the CEO. Baking cookies for someone because you saw them on a video call with their kid crossed a line, even if you couldn't quite articulate which line or why it mattered. But she didn't stop. She baked 24 cookies, packed half of them in a decorative tin she found in the back of a cupboard, and set it aside for morning. Then she poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking out at the Portland skyline and wondering when exactly she'd become the kind of person who worked alone in an empty office until 9 at night with no one waiting at home. Lonely at the top wasn't a cliche. It was geography. The next morning, HR sent out the weekly birthday list. Marcus Sullivan, March 15th. Diana stared at the email for a full minute, then picked up the tin and headed downstairs. TechVantage had a tradition called the CEO birthday walk. Once a week, the CEO picked a few employees from the birthday list and personally wished them happy birthday. Harold Brennan had started it years ago as a morale-building exercise, though he'd usually delegated the actual walking to his assistant. Diana had done it a handful of times since taking over, treating it like another item on her checklist. Smile, say happy birthday, move on. This time felt different. She walked through the 3rd floor open workspace with the tin under her arm, nodding at the people who glanced up from their desks. A few waved. Most went back to their screens. She moved with purpose toward Marcus's desk near the windows. He was reviewing a spreadsheet, frowning slightly at something in the numbers. His desk was immaculate. Laptop, coffee mug, one framed photo. No clutter, no personality beyond that single image of a little girl holding a stuffed elephant. Diana set the tin down next to his keyboard. Marcus looked up, surprise registering in the slight widening of his eyes. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Happy birthday, Marcus. He blinked once, processing. Thank you, Miss Reed. It's Diana, she nodded toward the tin. And these are homemade, chocolate chip. His surprise deepened into something closer to confusion. You baked these? Old habit from grad school. A few coworkers nearby had stopped working, attention drifting toward the unusual sight of the CEO standing at someone's desk with homemade cookies. Tyler Jenkins, who sat 2 desks over and had never met a moment of silence he didn't want to fill, leaned back in his chair with a grin. Tyler's voice carried. Boss, you better be careful with this one. Marcus here is perfect husband material. Single dad, responsible, never complains about anything. Laughter rippled outward. Other people picked up the thread, adding their own commentary. Someone mentioned that Marcus was the most eligible bachelor on the third floor. Someone else said Diana should snatch him up before HR from the second floor made their move. Diana felt the energy shift, the moment turning into office theater. She wasn't sure why she said it, maybe because the momentum of the moment pushed her. Maybe because she'd been thinking about him more than she should have. Maybe because Tyler's comment had opened a door and some part of her wanted to see what was on the other side. She turned toward Marcus, letting half a smile touch her face. "So Marcus, what do you say? Will you marry me?" The office erupted. Applause, whistles, laughter that filled every corner of the floor. Tyler nearly fell out of his chair. Someone near the back shouted about finally getting to see the Ice Queen thaw out. The noise was tremendous, warm, harmless, the kind of moment that would be repeated at happy hours and forgotten by Monday. Marcus didn't laugh. He met her eyes with a steadiness that cut through everything else. No embarrassment colored his face. No performative shock or exaggerated surprise. Just quiet certainty, the kind that came from someone who'd already lost everything that mattered and learned to weigh words carefully. His mouth curved into the faintest smile. "What if I say yes?" The laughter stopped like someone had cut the power. Heads turned, eyes widened. The applause died mid-clap. Diana's grin faltered, her lips parting as if to say something that would pull the moment back into safe territory, but her mind went blank. Marcus's expression didn't change. His gaze stayed locked on hers, patient and present. She understood then that he hadn't heard a joke. He'd heard a question. Someone coughed. The sound broke the tension like a hammer through glass. Conversations resumed. Keyboards clicked. The office reformed itself around the awkward moment, filing it away under quirky CEO interactions and moving on. Diana cleared her throat, stepped back half a pace. "Enjoy the cookies." And she turned to leave, but as she passed his desk, she leaned in just close enough that only he could hear. Her voice dropped to something private, something that wouldn't carry past the 3 feet between them. "I don't make empty gestures, Marcus. Think about it and give me a real answer someday." Then she walked away, spine straight, heels clicking against the floor with the precision of someone who'd spent 15 years learning to control every visible emotion. Behind her, Marcus sat motionless, staring at the tin of cookies while his coworkers returned to their work. The moment had already evaporated for them, another story to tell over lunch and forget by dinner. But Marcus knew. He opened the tin. The cookies were still warm, chocolate chips soft enough to leave traces on his fingers. He took one, bit into it, and tasted brown butter and sea salt and something that felt dangerously close to hope. He thought about what she'd said, not the joke, the part after. The rest of the day passed in a blur of emails and meetings. Marcus kept his head down, working through his task list with mechanical efficiency. Tyler tried to crack jokes about the marriage proposal, but Marcus deflected with practiced ease. By 5 o'clock, he'd packed up his laptop and headed out, same as always. No one mentioned it again. That night, after he'd picked up Sophie from Rosa's house and made dinner, mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, Sophie's favorite, he sat on the edge of her bed for story time. Sophie clutched Mr. Trunks under one arm and looked up at him with eyes that still sometimes looked exactly like Rebecca's. She tilted her head against the pillow. "Daddy, why are you smiling different?" Marcus blinked. "Am I?" "Uh-huh." She nodded with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could manage. "Like when we get ice cream." He didn't answer. He just kissed her forehead, read her the story about the train that could, and turned off the light. But as he stood in the doorway watching her sleep, he thought about Diana's words again. "Think about it. Give me a real answer someday. Being tired doesn't change what needs doing." That had been his philosophy for 4 years, ever since the night a state trooper knocked on his hospital room door and told him Rebecca hadn't made it. He'd learned to push through exhaustion, to make decisions based on what Sophie needed rather than what he wanted. There was no room in that equation for risk or hope or the possibility that life could be anything other than survival dressed up to look like living. But Diana Reed had asked him a question, and for the first time in 4 years, he'd felt something other than the weight of responsibility. He wanted to know what that meant. Diana didn't bring up the incident again. She stayed in her office more over the following days, attending back-to-back meetings, reviewing quarterly projections, handling the endless stream of decisions that came with running a mid-sized tech consulting firm. But distance didn't mean absence. She noticed Marcus in hallway conversations, the way he listened more than he talked. She saw his name in project update emails, always delivering on time, always finding solutions to problems that made other people panic. She watched how he moved through the office, quiet, competent, gone by 5:05 every single day without exception. Marcus didn't chase the moment either. He went back to his routine. Early arrival, focused work, on-time departure. Pick up Sophie from Rose's house, make dinner, play for an hour, bath time, story time, lights out. His life had a rhythm that had kept him functional for 4 years, and he didn't know how to fit someone like Diana Reid into it without breaking something fundamental. But the space between them wasn't empty. It was charged with awareness, with possibility, with the dangerous idea that maybe survival wasn't the only option. 2 weeks after the birthday incident, Diana called Marcus into her office. The reason was legitimate. A difficult client was threatening to pull their contract unless the deliverables improved, and Marcus had handled similar situations before. They needed a strategy meeting. They sat across from each other at the small meeting table in her office. The door opened per company policy about one-on-one meetings with direct reports. Diana laid out the details. The client was a healthcare software company based in Seattle. They'd contracted TechVantage to build a patient portal. The work was behind schedule, the interface was clunky, and their CTO was making noises about finding a new vendor. Marcus listened without interrupting, making notes in the margins of the spec document Diana had printed out. When she finished, he asked 3 questions about the client's technical infrastructure, 2 questions about their internal development team, and 1 question about whether they documented the reasons for the delays. Then he laid out a recovery plan. The conversation stayed professional, efficient, but underneath the surface ran something else. A tension neither of them named, awareness that hummed in the silence between sentences. At the end of the meeting, Diana leaned back in her chair and studied him. "You handle pressure well." Marcus shrugged, the motion slight. "Don't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." He met her eyes. "Not if you have a 4-year-old waiting at home." Diana let the silence settle between them. Then her voice came out quieter. "Do you ever get tired of being the responsible one?" Marcus considered the question for longer than it probably required. "Every day. But being tired doesn't change what needs doing." She nodded slowly and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. "That's the difference between you and most people here. They want recognition. You just want to go home." "Is that a bad thing?" "No." Diana's voice dropped even lower. "It's rare." They left it at that, but after Marcus had gone back to his desk and Diana had returned to her forecast spreadsheets, she couldn't focus. She kept thinking about what he'd said. Being tired doesn't change what needs doing. She'd spent 15 years operating on that same principle, pushing through exhaustion and loneliness because the next promotion was always just one more late night away. She'd sacrificed relationships and friendships and any semblance of balance because she'd believed the climb was worth it. Now she was at the top, and the view was just an empty office at 9 at night with no one to call when she got home. Over the next few weeks, there were more meetings, strategy sessions about the Seattle client, check-ins about other troubled projects, conversations that could have happened over email, but somehow required face-to-face discussion. Diana told herself it was good management, getting close to the details, understanding the challenges her teams faced. She wasn't lying to herself. She was just leaving out part of the truth. The meeting started moving off-site. Diana suggested a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office, a place where they could talk without the glass walls and open floor plans that made every interaction feel like public performance. Marcus agreed without question. They met there on Thursday afternoons when his schedule allowed, sitting in a corner booth with laptops and notebooks spread between them. The conversations began with work, but drifted into other territory. Diana asked about his project management philosophy. He asked about her transition from VP to CEO. She mentioned growing up in Minnesota with parents who taught high school. He told her about Rebecca, just the basic facts, the way he learned to deliver information without letting emotion seep through. 4 weeks after the birthday incident, they sat in that corner booth on a gray Thursday afternoon. Rain streaked the windows. Diana stirred her latte absently, the spoon making soft clinks against the ceramic. Her voice came out carefully, like she was testing the weight of each word. Do you ever think about what different choices would look like? Marcus looked up from his laptop. You mean if Rebecca hadn't died? Diana flinched. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... It's okay. He closed the laptop halfway. But no, I don't think about alternate timelines. I think about making this one work. That's survival instinct. It's the only instinct I have left. Diana set down the spoon. She looked at him properly then, not as CEO to employee, but as one person to another, both carrying weights no one else could see. I spent 15 years climbing. Analyst to senior analyst to manager to VP to CEO. Sacrificed relationships, friendships, personal life. My parents call on birthdays and Christmas. I haven't been on a date in 3 years. Everyone at work either wants something from me or is afraid of me. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Lonely at the top isn't a cliche, it's geography. Marcus watched her, seeing past the professional armor to something underneath. You're not what I expected when the new CEO arrived. What did you expect? Corporate robot, someone who'd spend 6 months in the corner office and then move on to the next company. He allowed himself a small smile. Got someone who bakes cookies instead. Diana laughed softly. The cookies were an impulse. I saw you that night. What night? 2 weeks before your birthday. Working late? You were in the conference room on a video call with Sophie. She met his eyes. You were so gentle with her while handling a work crisis. Made me realize you're carrying everything alone. Marcus went still. He hadn't known anyone had seen that, the vulnerability of it, being watched in a moment he'd thought was private, should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like being seen for the first time in 4 years. His voice came out rougher than he intended. If I choose someone, I choose stability, not excitement. Diana leaned forward slightly. What if stability is exciting? Marcus's smile widened just a fraction. Then I'd say you've never worried about making rent on time. I have. Her voice carried sudden intensity. Long time ago, scholarship student, teacher's daughter, 3 jobs in college. I know what it's like to choose between groceries and chow. That's why I notice when someone else does the same. Marcus studied her with new understanding. He'd assumed, like everyone else, that she'd come from money, that the corner office was just another inheritance in a long line of advantages. Finding out he'd been wrong shifted something fundamental. You climbed it from scholarship student to CEO? Every single step. Diana held his gaze, which is why I respect people who work hard without needing applause. The coffee had gone cold in both their cups. Rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. Neither of them mentioned the marriage joke directly, but it hovered between them like smoke. Visible, present, impossible to ignore. Marcus broke the silence first. I should get going. Need to pick up Sophie. Diana nodded. They packed up their things, left cash on the table, and walked out into the drizzle. On the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, they paused. Diana pulled her coat tighter. Same time next week? Yeah. Marcus hesitated, then added, thanks for the coffee, for listening. Thank you for showing up. They separated, Diana heading north toward her condo, Marcus south toward his car. But as Marcus drove to Rosa's house, navigating familiar streets through the rain, he thought about what Diana had said. What if stability is exciting? The idea felt foreign, dangerous, like picking up something heavy without knowing if it would hold his weight or break his hands. Sophie was waiting at Rosa's front door when he arrived, Mr. Trunks tucked under one arm and her backpack hanging off the other shoulder. Rosa waved from inside and Marcus waved back, lifting Sophie into his arms and carrying her to the car. That night, after dinner and bath time and the bedtime story, Marcus sat in his living room with the lights off, looking out at the street below. His apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for a table and chairs. The furniture was second-hand, functional, but worn. Every month was a calculation. Rent, daycare, groceries, utilities, car payment, insurance. There was no buffer, no safety net beyond his next paycheck. Choosing someone meant choosing risk. It meant opening up space in his carefully calibrated life for another variable, another place where things could go wrong. It meant trusting that the ground wouldn't disappear beneath his feet again. But Diana Reed had asked him a question, and he'd answered honestly. What if I say yes? He'd meant it then, in that moment surrounded by laughter and office noise. He meant it now, sitting alone in the dark while Sophie slept down the hall. The question wasn't whether he wanted to say yes. The question was whether he was brave enough to mean it. 6 weeks after the coffee shop conversation, Marcus's phone rang at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. He was already dressed, Sophie at the kitchen table finishing her cereal, backpack ready by the door. The number showed Rose's name. Her voice came through, congested and weak. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I woke up with a fever and I can't stop coughing. I don't think I should be around Sophie today. Marcus's stomach dropped. He glanced at the clock, then at his calendar notification showing 2 critical meetings before lunch. No, you're right. Don't worry about it. Feel better. He ended the call and stared at his phone like it might offer solutions it didn't contain. No backup childcare, no family within 500 miles, no co-workers he knew well enough to ask for emergency favors. The math was simple and brutal. Take Sophie to work or miss the meetings that could cost him his job. Sophie looked up from her bowl, milk dripping off her spoon. Daddy, what's wrong? Marcus crouched beside her chair, forcing his voice into something approximating calm. How would you feel about visiting Daddy's office today? Just for a few hours. Sophie's eyes went wide, her entire face lighting up. Really? Like a big girl? Really, but you have to be very, very quiet, like a mouse. Sophie nodded so hard her pigtails bounced. I'll be the quietest mouse ever. Promise. Marcus closed his eyes for a second, calculating risk against necessity. Then he stood. Okay, go change into your blue dress, the one with the flowers. By 9:15, they were walking through the Tech Vantage lobby, Sophie's hand clasped tight in his, her other arm wrapped around Mr. Trunks. The receptionist smiled at them. A few early arrivals glanced their way with curious expressions. Marcus kept moving, heading straight for HR. The HR director listened to his explanation with sympathetic professionalism. Emergency situations happened. Kids got sick, childcare fell through. The company understood. Marcus could set Sophie up in conference room B, the small one near the windows that wasn't scheduled for use until afternoon. Just keep her quiet and contained. Marcus thanked her and led Sophie down the hallway. Conference room B had a long table, 8 chairs, and a wall of windows overlooking the parking lot. He pulled out a chair at the far end and helped Sophie climb up. From his messenger bag, he produced her arsenal of entertainment, 3 coloring books, a fresh box of crayons, a Tupperware container of goldfish crackers, a juice box, her iPad loaded with downloaded episodes of her favorite show. He spread everything across the table like he was setting up a command center. His voice came out firmer than he felt. You stay right here, okay? Don't leave this room. If you need the bathroom, you come find me at my desk. I'll show you where it is on the way. Sophie arranged Mr. Trunks carefully against the window. Can I color you a picture? Color me 10 pictures. I want this whole table covered. She giggled and reached for the crayons. Marcus kissed the top of her head, double-checked that she had everything she needed, then forced himself to walk out and close the door to a crack. Through the gap, he could see her bent over a coloring book, tongue poking out in concentration. The 9 o'clock client call was a disaster of divided attention. Marcus sat at his desk with his headset on, participating in a discussion about API integration issues while his brain tracked the time. Every 10 minutes, he found an excuse to mute his mic and check on Sophie. She was fine, coloring, snacking, watching something on the iPad with headphones in. But his concentration fractured every time someone on the call asked him a direct question. At 10:30, Sophie appeared at his desk, Mr. Trunks dangling from one hand. Daddy, I need to go potty. 3 coworkers nearby looked up. Marcus pulled off his headset and stood quickly. Okay, sweetheart, come on. He led her to the women's restroom and knocked first to make sure it was empty. A woman from accounting was washing her hands. She smiled at Sophie, dried off, and left. Marcus waited outside the door, checking his watch, aware that his 11 o'clock meeting started in half an hour and he hadn't finished the prep work. Sophie emerged triumphant. "I washed my hands all by myself." "Good job. Back to the room now, okay? Just a little longer." By 11, he was in the review meeting, sitting at a conference table with 5 other people, including the VP of Operations, presenting a project timeline while his mind kept circling back to Sophie alone in conference room B. What if she got bored and wandered? What if she got scared? What if someone went in there and asked her questions she didn't know how to answer? The meeting ran 20 minutes over. When Marcus finally escaped at 11:40, he practically jogged back to conference room B. Through the door, he could see Sophie right where he'd left her, surrounded by finished coloring pages and empty goldfish crackers. She waved when she saw him. Relief flooded through him so fast it left him dizzy. Diana had been in back-to-back meetings all morning, a budget review followed by a strategic planning session with the executive team. She emerged at 11:30 with a tension headache building behind her eyes and walked the 4th-floor hallway to clear her head before the next item on her calendar. On her way back toward her office, she took the stairs down to the 3rd floor instead of the elevator. Old habit from her analyst days, movement helped her think, and stairs forced blood flow when coffee and willpower started failing. The 3rd floor was busy, people moving between desks and conference rooms, the low hum of productivity that made her feel less like a figure on an org chart and more like part of something functional. She passed conference room B and noticed the door slightly ajar. Something made her glance inside. Marcus crouched on the floor, tying the shoelaces of a small girl in a blue dress with the flowers. The girl held a stuffed elephant under one arm and was saying something that made Marcus smile. Not the careful professional expression he wore in meetings, but something genuine and unguarded. Diana stopped walking. Her hand moved to the doorframe almost without conscious decision. She knocked lightly. Marcus looked up, surprise flashing across his face before settling into something closer to resignation. He stood, and Diana saw him calculating how much trouble this might cause. Her voice came out gentler than she'd intended. "Need a hand?" Marcus straightened fully, one hand moving to rest on his daughter's shoulder. "Ms. Reed, Diana, I'm sorry. Emergency situation. Rosa was sick this morning. I promised she wouldn't be any trouble." Diana stepped inside and crouched down to the girl's eye level, ignoring the formality of standing positions and power dynamics. She offered a warm smile, the kind she hadn't used in professional settings since somewhere around her 2nd promotion. "Hi there, what's your name?" The girl glanced at Marcus first, seeking permission. He nodded slightly. She turned back to Diana with the careful seriousness of a 4-year-old meeting an adult stranger. "Sophie. That's a beautiful name. I'm Diana." She nodded toward the elephant. "And who's this handsome fellow?" "Mr. Trunks. He goes everywhere with me." "I can see why. He looks very important." Diana reached into her blazer pocket, feeling the wrapped butterscotch candy she'd grabbed from the bowl on her assistant's desk during the budget meeting. She held it out in her palm. "Would you like this? But only if your daddy says it's okay." She looked up at Marcus, meeting his eyes with a question that had nothing to do with candy. His expression had shifted from resignation to something harder to name. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition of kindness he hadn't expected. He nodded. Sophie took the candy carefully with both hands. "Thank you, Miss Diana." "Just Diana is fine." She stood and turned her full attention to Marcus. "She's lovely." Marcus's voice came out quiet, weighted with the kind of truth that didn't need emphasis. "She's my whole world." Diana held his gaze for a moment that stretched longer than professionalism strictly allowed. Something passed between them. Understanding. Connection. The acknowledgement that they'd both just shown each other something real. Then she stepped back toward the door. "If you need anything this afternoon, let me know. And Marcus?" She paused at the threshold. "You're a good father." She left before he could respond, but the words stayed with him long after her footsteps faded down the hallway. What neither of them noticed were the 2 people standing by the printer alcove 20 feet away. Jennifer Chen from accounting and Paul Morrison from the same department, both ostensibly waiting for documents, but really just taking a break from spreadsheets. They'd watched the entire interaction through conference room B's glass wall. Jennifer spoke first, her voice low but carrying. "Did you see that?" Paul glanced over, then back at the printer like they were having a casual conversation about toner cartridges. CEO never talks to anyone's kids. Ever. She was so, Jennifer searched for the word, personal. The way she crouched down, gave Sophie candy, smiled like that. And they've been having all those private meetings, the coffee shop ones. Paul pulled his printouts from the tray even though they weren't his. Tyler said she brought him homemade birthday cookies last month. Jennifer's eyebrows climbed. Homemade? That's what he said. They stood there for another moment, absorbing the implications. Then Jennifer lowered her voice even further. You think something's going on? Paul shrugged with theatrical neutrality. I'm not saying anything. But that looked pretty friendly. By the end of the day, the whispers had started. Quiet at first, exchanged in break rooms, and whispered over cubicle walls. Did you hear about Sullivan and the CEO? She spent 10 minutes with his kid this morning. Gave her candy, and they've been meeting off-site every week. Isn't that favoritism? Isn't that inappropriate? Some people thought it was harmless. Some thought it was crossing lines. A few thought it was strategic maneuvering they didn't fully understand yet. The gossip spread through the usual channels. Slack messages marked just between us. Conversations at happy hours. Speculation dressed up as concern. Marcus remained oblivious. He made it through the rest of the day in survival mode, checking on Sophie every 30 minutes, finishing his work in fragmented bursts between interruptions. At 5 o'clock, he packed up both their things, carried Sophie to the car, and drove home feeling like he'd successfully navigated a minefield. Diana attended 3 more meetings and answered 47 emails. The interaction with Sophie filed away as a bright spot in an otherwise grinding day. She went home that night to her empty condo and microwaved leftover Thai food, standing at her kitchen counter and wondering when she'd become the kind of person who could connect with a 4-year-old stranger but couldn't remember the last time she'd had a real conversation with a peer. Neither of them knew the damage was already spreading beneath the surface. Garrett Hayes had been watching Marcus Sullivan for months with the focused attention of someone nursing a very specific grievance. 41 years old, 9 years with TechVantage, senior financial analyst, with enough responsibility to feel important, but never enough recognition to feel valued. 3 years ago, he'd applied for a director position. The job went to someone else. When Diana became CEO, he'd allowed himself hope that things might change. They hadn't. And now this kid, 32 years old, half Garrett's tenure, playing the tragic widower card, was getting the CEO's personal attention, while Garrett's performance reviews continued to meet expectations year after year. He started paying closer attention after the birthday cookie incident, not because he cared about office romance, but because leverage was leverage and information was currency. He reviewed Marcus's project files looking for mistakes, examined email chains for policy violations, checked expense reports for irregularities. Everything came up clean. Marcus was legitimately good at his job, which made Garrett dislike him even more. The morning Sophie came to the office, Garrett was getting coffee when he saw the whole thing. Marcus walking in with a little girl, the setup in conference room B, the CEO stopping by to give candy and chat like they were old friends. He filed it away with everything else. That evening, Garrett stayed late working on a financial model the CFO wanted by end of week. The office had emptied out except for a handful of people scattered across different floors. He was on his 3rd cup of coffee when an idea began forming. Sharp and cold and perfectly logical. He couldn't find dirt on Marcus because there wasn't any, so he'd have to create some. The merger file had been sitting on the shared drive for 2 weeks. TechVantage was in late-stage negotiations to acquire a smaller competitor based in Austin, a move that would expand their market share in healthcare tech and put them in position for better contracts. The deal was confidential. Only a handful of people had authorized access: Diana, the CFO, legal team, board members, and 3 senior executives who needed the information to prepare integration plans. Garrett had access because his role supporting the CFO required him to build financial projections. He'd reviewed the merger documents dozens of times, running scenarios and stress tests. It was legitimate work. No one would question why his digital fingerprints were all over the file. He opened the document and read through it again, making sure he understood every detail. Then he saved a copy to his personal cloud storage, using his phone as a hotspot to mask the IP address. The next morning, sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, he accessed the file from his laptop over public Wi-Fi. The digital trail would show the file leaving TechVantage's network, but tracing it specifically to him would be harder. He didn't leak anything yet. That would come later, time for maximum effect. First, he needed to set the frame. Thursday afternoon, Garrett composed an email from his work account. The subject line read, "Marcus, need your review ASAP." The body was short and professional. "Hi, Marcus. Can you review these updated projections before tomorrow's meeting? CFO wants your input on the resource allocation sections." "Thanks, Garrett." He attached the merger file, but before sending, he renamed it Q4 Budget Projections Review Updated PDF. Same formatting as the quarterly budget documents they all dealt with regularly. Nothing to raise suspicion, just another file that needed review. He hit send at 4:47 on Thursday afternoon. Marcus received the email at 4:52 while finishing up a status report. He was already thinking about picking up Sophie, about traffic patterns and dinner options, and whether they had enough milk for cereal in the morning. He opened the email without much thought, saw the familiar budget file name, and clicked the PDF. The first page looked like budget projections, headers, columns, numbers that seemed roughly right for Q4. He scrolled to the second page. The header changed. Instead of budget line items, he saw acquisition target details, financial projections for the merged entity, strategic integration plans. His brain caught up with what he was seeing. This wasn't budget projections. This was the merger file, confidential information he had no business accessing. He closed the PDF immediately, checking the timestamp. 4:54, 2 minutes of access. He didn't download anything, didn't forward anything, didn't even read past the first few lines of page 2. He deleted the email and then made a mental note to tell Garrett about the labeling error tomorrow. Then he grabbed his jacket and left to get Sophie, the incident already fading behind more immediate concerns. Garrett waited until Friday morning to make his anonymous tip. He used a burner email account, routing it through a VPN, keeping the message brief. Confidential merger file may have been accessed inappropriately. Suggest checking access logs. The tip went to general security rather than anyone specific. By 10 o'clock, the security team had pulled the access logs. By 11, they'd escalated to legal and age. Garrett's access showed as authorized. Marcus's access showed as unauthorized, logged at 4:54 p.m. Thursday with a duration of 2 minutes. Diana found out at 1:30 when the head of legal knocked on her office door with the HR director in tow. They laid out the situation in careful corporate language. Unauthorized access to confidential documents. Potential security breach. They'd already interviewed Garrett, who'd expressed confusion about why Marcus would need to see the merger file and concern about whether it had been shared outside the company. Diana's first instinct was disbelief. Her second was dread. She pulled up Marcus's access history herself, verified the timestamps, checked for any indication of downloads or forwards. Everything the security team had found was accurate. Marcus had opened the file. The logs didn't lie. Her voice came out flat. "Have you talked to Marcus?" The HR director shook her head. "We wanted to brief you first. This involves potential policy violations that could require immediate suspension." Diana stared at the access logs on her screen, feeling something crack in her chest. She thought about Marcus in the coffee shop, saying he chose stability over excitement. She thought about him tying Sophie's shoes in conference room B, unaware anyone was watching. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when she asked if he'd marry her. Like the question mattered more than the joke, she forced her expression into neutral corporate mask. "Schedule an emergency all-staff meeting for Monday morning, 9 o'clock, everyone." Legal exchanged glances with HR. "You want to address this publicly?" "If we're suspending someone for security violations, the company needs to know we take this seriously." Diana met their eyes without flinching. "We handle this by the book. No exceptions." Over the weekend, Diana barely slept. She ran through every scenario, every possible explanation, every way this could be something other than what it looked like. She called an independent forensic audit firm Saturday afternoon and paid triple the normal rate for expedited service. She needed the truth, not just the access logs, but the forensic team couldn't start until Monday. and they estimated 6 days minimum for a complete audit. 6 days while Marcus was suspended without pay. 6 days while rumors spread and reputations crumbled. 6 days while she had to maintain professional distance and pretend she didn't care about the outcome. Marcus spent Saturday at the park with Sophie, pushing her on the swings and catching her at the bottom of the slide, trying not to think about work or Diana, or the strange flutter of hope that had taken up residence somewhere behind his ribs. Sunday they went to the Children's Museum and then got ice cream. Normal weekend activities that felt precious because they were simple. Monday morning he walked into the office at his usual time, coffee in hand, mentally preparing for the week ahead. The all-staff meeting notification had come through Sunday night. Mandatory attendance, 9 a.m. sharp, no agenda listed. Probably another announcement about policy changes or quarterly results. By 8:45, the conference room was packed. People stood against the walls, sat on the floor near the back, crammed into every available space. The energy felt wrong, tense and electric, whispers spreading faster than usual. Marcus found a spot in the middle section and waited. Diana entered at exactly 9 o'clock, flanked by the HR director and legal counsel. Her face showed nothing. She moved to the front of the room without looking at anyone specifically. Garrett Hayes stood near the screen where presentations usually displayed, holding a folder and wearing an expression that tried for neutral, but landed somewhere closer to satisfied. Diana's voice cut through the murmurs. I owe everyone an update on a serious matter. Last week, we discovered a security breach involving confidential acquisition information. The room went completely silent. A restricted file containing details about an upcoming merger was accessed by someone without proper authorization. This violates company policy and puts all of us at risk. She nodded to Garrett. I'll let Garrett walk you through what we found. Garrett stepped forward, projecting calm competence. Thursday afternoon, a sensitive document was accessed from an account that didn't have clearance. We've traced the activity through our access logs. He clicked a remote, and the screen lit up with a simplified version of the security report. 2 names appeared with timestamps. Garrett Hayes, 4:15 p.m. authorized. Marcus Sullivan, 4:54 p.m. unauthorized. Every head in the room turned to look at Marcus. The weight of 300 stares pressed against him like physical force. Marcus's mind raced through the sequence. The email from Garrett. The PDF he'd opened for 2 minutes. The realization it was the wrong file. None of that explained why he was being singled out in an all-staff meeting unless something had gone very wrong very quickly. Garrett continued, his voice taking on notes of reluctant duty. We confirmed the file was sent to Marcus Sullivan via email with a subject line that could have caused confusion. However, the access logs show the document was opened. Company policy states that unauthorized access to confidential files, regardless of intent, is grounds for immediate suspension pending investigation. The HR director stepped forward. This isn't about assigning blame before we have all the facts. It's about following protocol. We take security seriously here, and that means treating all potential breaches with equal weight. Marcus stood up, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. I opened the file by mistake. It was labeled as budget projections. I realized the error within seconds and closed it immediately. I didn't download, didn't forward, didn't share anything with anyone. Garrett's expression showed practiced sympathy. I understand it may have been an accident, but you still accessed restricted information. The logs show you had the file open for 2 minutes. I was reading the first page trying to figure out what it was. Marcus's voice stayed level. Check my devices. I didn't keep anything. The HR director looked to Diana. The entire room watched the silent communication pass between CEO and HR, waiting to see which way the decision would fall. Diana's face remained unreadable. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone making a decision she knew would hurt but saw no way around. Marcus Sullivan is suspended effective immediately, pending full investigation. He'll be barred from office access and company systems until legal completes their review. The words landed like hammer blows. Marcus felt his stomach drop, felt the floor shift beneath him. He searched Diana's face for some sign, doubt, regret, anything, but found only corporate professionalism. Her voice continued, merciless in its neutrality. This applies to any employee in similar circumstances. We can't have separate standards for different people. Marcus grabbed his messenger bag from where he'd set it beside his chair. The security team was already moving toward him, ready to escort him out like he was a criminal. He walked toward the exit with his spine straight and his eyes forward, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him break. As he passed the front of the room, his eyes met Diana's for half a second. He didn't plead, didn't argue, just looked at her with something that might have been understanding or might have been disappointment. Then he was through the door and gone. The whispers exploded before security even reached the elevators. Did you see his face? He looked shocked. Or guilty. I heard he and the CEO were close. Maybe that's why she's being so harsh, trying to look impartial. This is what happens when you get too friendly with the boss. Diana waited for the noise to settle before dismissing the meeting. She walked back to her office alone, closed the door, and sat at her desk staring at nothing. The access logs were still open on her screen. Marcus Sullivan, unauthorized access, 4:54 p.m. She'd just destroyed a man's career to protect her own position. She'd chosen the job over the person. And the worst part was knowing she'd do it again because the alternative was letting emotion compromise judgment. And that was how CEOs got fired. That evening, after the building had emptied and the sun had set behind the Portland Hills, someone knocked on Diana's office door. She looked up from the forensic audit proposal she'd been reading, expecting security or the cleaning crew. Marcus stood in the doorway. His voice came out quiet, stripped of everything except the need to know. Do you believe I did it? Diana met his eyes. The professional mask cracked just enough to let truth through. No. Then why didn't you defend me? She stood, moved around her desk, stopped a few feet from where he stood. Because if I protect you, Mo, they'll destroy us both. They already think something's going on between us. If I show favoritism, they'll say I'm compromised. Your innocence won't matter. They'll just say I'm covering for you because we're involved. Marcus absorbed this, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling on grim understanding. So you chose your position. I chose time. Diana's voice dropped even lower. Time to find the truth. I've hired a forensic audit team. They start tomorrow, 6 days to go through everything, access logs, device records, network traffic, email servers. If you're innocent, I'll prove it. And if you can't? She didn't answer, couldn't answer. They both knew the stakes. Marcus nodded slowly, accepting what couldn't be changed. I understand. I'd do the same if I were alone. He turned to leave but stopped at the threshold. I don't blame you, Diana, really. You're doing what you have to do. Then he was gone, and Diana was left standing in her office wondering if doing what you had to do made you strong or just made you someone who chose safety over courage every single time. The first week without a paycheck felt like standing at the edge of a cliff watching the ground crumble. Marcus had $3,400 in his savings account. Rent was $1,850, due in 10 days. Sophie's daycare charged $800 monthly, and he was already a week overdue. Utilities, groceries, car payment, insurance. The math didn't work no matter how many times he recalculated it on his phone at 2 a.m. He started reaching out Wednesday, calling former colleagues from his Seattle days, leaving messages with subject lines like freelance availability and quick consulting question. Most messages went unanswered. The 3 people who did respond were apologetic but firm. Sorry, heard about the suspension. Can't risk association until it's cleared up. Company policy, you understand. Marcus understood. He understood that reputation was currency, and his had just been devalued to nothing. By Thursday, he'd created profiles on Upwork and Freelancer, bidding on anything remotely related to project management or business analysis. The jobs paid $300 here, $400 there, website audits, financial modeling, process documentation. He took everything offered and worked after Sophie went to sleep, hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table while the apartment stayed dark to save on electricity. Friday morning, Sophie sat across from him at breakfast, pushing cereal around her bowl. Her voice came out small. Daddy, why are we eating pasta again? Marcus forced brightness into his tone. Because it's delicious and easy to make. But we had pasta yesterday, and the day before yesterday. Tell you what, tonight we'll try a different sauce. Make it special. Sophie accepted this with the resilient optimism of a 4-year-old. but her eyes held questions she didn't know how to ask. That night, after he'd tucked her in and read the story about the brave little engine, Marcus sat in his living room with the lights off and counted the cash in his wallet. $63 until next Friday's freelance payments hit his account. Rent was due Tuesday. The email from DataCore Systems arrived Saturday morning while he was making scrambled eggs. The subject line read, Senior PM position, immediate opening. Marcus opened it one-handed, spatula still in the other. The recruiter remembered him from a conference in Sacramento 8 months back. She'd been impressed by his presentation on agile methodology in healthcare software development. DataCore was expanding their Denver office. They needed a senior project manager, could offer $95,000 base plus benefits, wanted someone to start within 3 weeks. Marcus read the email twice while the eggs congealed in the pan. $95,000, that was $23,000 more than TechVantage paid him. That was security, breathing room, the ability to save money instead of watching every dollar disappear before it landed. That was also Denver, 900 miles from Portland, a new city where Sophie would know no one. Different preschool, different park, different streets. Rosa wouldn't be there. The Children's Museum where Sophie loved the water table wouldn't be there. Rebecca's grave in Cedar Hill Cemetery wouldn't be there. He saved the email to drafts and went back to the eggs, scraping them onto a plate for Sophie, even though they had gone rubbery and cold. Wednesday morning, 6 days into suspension, Sophie came into the kitchen while Marcus was staring at his bank balance on his phone. She climbed into the chair across from him, Mr. Trunks tucked under one arm. Her voice carried that particular seriousness children use when they're trying to understand adult problems. Daddy, are you sad? Marcus looked up, startled. Why would you think that? You don't smile the same. Your smile goes on your face, but not in your eyes. He set the phone down, reached across the table to take her small hand. I'm okay, sweetheart, just tired. Grown-up stuff. Sophie tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that sometimes reminded him painfully of Rebecca. Can I ask you something? Always. If we had someone new in our life, would that be okay? Marcus went very still. What do you mean? Sophie traced invisible patterns on the table with her free hand. Like the pretty lady at your work, the one who gave me candy. She smiled at me like... Sophie paused, searching for words. Like in the pictures of Mommy. Nice smile. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the armor he'd been wearing for 4 years. He hadn't expected Sophie to remember Diana, hadn't expected her to connect that brief interaction with anything meaningful. Certainly hadn't expected her to articulate what he'd been afraid to admit, that he wanted something more than survival, even if he had no idea how to reach for it. His voice came out rough. Would you be okay with that? If Daddy had someone new? Sophie nodded with complete certainty. If she reads bedtime stories, and if she's nice like that lady. Marcus pulled her into his lap, held her against his chest, and wondered when his 4-year-old daughter had become wiser than he was about what mattered. That night, he opened the draft email to DataCore. His cursor hovered over the reply field. He typed, I'm interested in discussing the position further, and stopped. The words sat there incomplete, waiting for him to commit. He looked towards Sophie's bedroom where she slept with Mr. Trunks and the nightlight casting elephant-shaped shadows on the wall. He saved the draft again without sending it. Diana hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night since Monday's meeting. The forensic audit team worked around the clock, 3 investigators pouring through access logs and device records and network traffic patterns. She checked in with them every 6 hours, asking them for updates she knew they couldn't give until the analysis was complete. Tuesday afternoon, the board called an emergency session. Diana drove to the downtown office building where the quarterly meetings usually happen, climbing to the 20th floor conference room with its view of the Willamette River and the mountains beyond. 7 board members sat around the polished table, Chairman Richard Walsh at the head. Walsh didn't waste time on pleasantries. Ms. Reed, we need to discuss the Sullivan situation. Diana set her leather portfolio on the table. Investigation is ongoing. We'll have forensic results by Friday. Friday may be too late. Walsh gestured to the tablet in front of him. Patterson Corporation pulled their contract renewal this morning, $2.3 million annually. They cited security concerns and reputational risk. Another board member, a woman named Chen, who'd made her fortune in medical devices, leaned forward. Social media is calling you out personally. Tech blogs are asking if you suspended him because the relationship got messy. This is becoming a liability. Diana kept her expression neutral, even as anger spiked hot in her throat. Marcus Sullivan hasn't been proven guilty of anything. Firing him without completing the investigation opens us to wrongful termination suits. Walsh's voice hardened. Legal says we're covered under security policy. Unauthorized access is grounds for immediate termination. Intent irrelevant. Intent is always relevant. Diana's voice stayed level through sheer force of will. If we fire someone for an honest mistake, every employee here will know we value optics over truth. That's how you lose talent. That's how we protect shareholders. Walsh set down his tablet. The board's position is clear. Terminate Sullivan. Issue a statement about zero tolerance. Move forward. Dana looked at each of them in turn, seeing calculation and risk assessment and the cold mathematics of corporate governance. None of them cared about Marcus. None of them cared about truth. They cared about stock price and quarterly earnings and not being the board that presided over a scandal. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Give me 1 week. The forensic audit completes Friday. If Marcus leaked anything, if he violated policy with intent, I'll terminate him myself. But if he's innocent, we owe him reinstatement and public apology. And if the audit takes longer than Friday? Diana met Walsh's eyes without flinching. If I can't prove his innocence by Friday, I'll resign. You can replace me with someone who makes decisions based on fear instead of facts. The room went silent. Chen exchanged glances with the member beside her. Walsh studied Diana like he was trying to calculate whether she was bluffing. Finally, he nodded. Friday, 5 p.m. Be prepared to present findings or tender your resignation. Diana gathered her portfolio and left. In the elevator down, she pulled out her phone and called the forensic team lead. I need results by Friday noon. Not negotiable. Whatever resources you need, you have them. The lead investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd spent 15 years with the FBI before going private, didn't hesitate. We'll have them. Thursday morning at 6:45, Sarah arrived at Diana's office with a manila folder thick enough to bend. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked like she'd been awake as long as Diana had. Sarah set the folder on the desk. You need to see this. Diana opened it. The first section showed Marcus's device activity, timestamps, file access logs, network traffic, every action documented. Opens merger file at 16:54. Duration, 2 minutes 14 seconds. Browser behavior, scroll to page 2, cursor stops, immediate window closure. No downloads, no forwards, no screenshots, no secondary access from any device associated with his accounts. The pattern matched someone who'd opened the wrong file and closed it the moment they realized the mistake. Sarah flipped to the next section. Now look at Garrett Hayes. The timeline painted a different picture entirely. 6 weeks of normal merger file access is part of his job. Then Tuesday, 6 weeks back. File accessed, copied to personal cloud storage. Digital signatures showing upload to external server. Wednesday, external IP address. Traced to a coffee shop Wi-Fi network 3 blocks from the office. Access the same cloud storage. That IP resolved to a journalist at the Oregonian who covered tech industry news. Thursday, Garrett sent the mislabeled bytes file to Marcus. Friday, Garrett filed anonymous tip about potential breach. Sarah pointed to a printout of email metadata. He used a burner account routed through VPN for the tip. Thought he'd covered his tracks, but the timing's too perfect. And there's more. She opened another section. Financial analysis showing fake vendor accounts, small amounts routing through Garrett's approval authority over 18 months. 2,300 here, 4,800 there. Amounts small enough to slip past quarterly reviews, but large enough to add up. Total, $87,000 stolen over time. Buried in budget reconciliations and project expenses that no one questioned because Garrett was senior enough to be trusted. Diana's hands tightened on the folder. He framed Marcus to create a distraction. More than that, Sarah pulled out another document. Look at the leak timing. Garrett sent merger details to the journalist 2 days before Marcus even received the file. But if everyone's focused on Marcus's unauthorized access, no one's checking when the actual leak occurred or who had legitimate access during that window. It's misdirection. Make Marcus the villain so no one looks at anyone else. Exactly. And if Marcus gets fired for security violations, it sets precedent. Makes it easier to explain away Garrett's own file access if questions ever come up. Sarah leaned back. This was sophisticated. He knew what he was doing. Diana closed the folder and looked at the clock. Thursday, 9:15 a.m. Board meeting was tomorrow at 5. She had less than 32 hours to decide how to handle this, and she already knew what she had to do. She picked up her phone and started making calls. Friday morning, the all-staff notification went out at 7 a.m. Mandatory meeting, 10 o'clock. Everyone required to attend either in person or via video stream. The message came from Diana's office with no agenda attached. By 9:45, the conference room had filled past capacity. People stood against walls, sat on the floor near the back, spilled into the hallway outside. The energy crackled with speculation. Marcus watched the live stream from his apartment, sitting on the couch with his laptop balanced on his knees while Sophie played with blocks on the living room floor. He'd been ignoring messages all week, avoiding calls, staying offline as much as possible. But Rosa had texted him that morning. Diana's holding emergency meeting. You should watch. At exactly 10 o'clock, Diana entered the frame, flanked by Sarah Chen and the HR director. No Garrett. Diana moved to the front of the room with the controlled precision of someone who'd made a decision and accepted its consequences. Her voice cut through the silence. I owe everyone an apology. I owe Marcus Sullivan more than that. Marcus sat forward. The investigation into last week's security breach has concluded. Marcus Sullivan is completely innocent. The conference room exploded into whispers. Diana held up one hand for silence. The real source of the breach has been identified. Garrett Hayes, senior financial analyst, has been terminated effective immediately. He will face criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. She nodded to Sarah, who pulled up a simplified timeline on the screen. Garrett's file access, the cloud storage upload, the external IP at the coffee shop, the email to the journalist dated 2 days before Marcus received anything. Diana's voice stayed level, prosecutorial. Garrett Hayes deliberately sent Marcus a mislabeled file to frame him. The actual leak occurred from Garrett's account 48 hours before Marcus even saw the document. Marcus opened it briefly, realized the error, and closed it immediately. He did not leak anything. He did not violate policy with intent. She paused, letting the information settle. Furthermore, our forensic audit discovered that Garrett embezzled $87,000 over 18 months through fake vendor accounts. He set up Marcus as a distraction. If everyone focused on Marcus's breach, no one would examine the real security failure. The room sat in stunned silence. Tyler, who'd made the husband material joke at Marcus's birthday, raised his hand. Where's Marcus now? We've been trying to reach him. He hasn't responded to calls or emails. Diana turned to face the camera directly. Marcus, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I should have trusted you from the start. Should have fought harder, faster. I let process matter more than person, and that was wrong. Her voice cracked slightly, the professional mask slipping just enough to show something real underneath. Marcus Sullivan is reinstated immediately. Full back pay for all suspension days. Formal written apology from the company, and personal apology from me for not protecting you when you needed it most. Marcus sat frozen, staring at his screen while Sophie tugged on his sleeve, asking what was wrong. The live stream continued, Diana explaining new security protocols, answering questions about how this happened, acknowledging the company's failure. But Marcus barely heard it. His mind was stuck on 5 words. I should have trusted you. His phone buzzed. Text from Rosa. Call Diana, now. He looked at Sophie, who'd abandoned her blocks to climb onto the couch beside him. Daddy, you look like you're going to cry. Are they happy tears or sad tears? Marcus pulled her close. I don't know yet, baby. I really don't know. He called Diana's office line. Her assistant answered and put him through immediately. Diana's voice came through steady despite everything. Marcus, thank you for calling. Can you come in? When? Now, if you can, please. Marcus looked around his small apartment, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the half-packed boxes he'd started filling in case Denver became inevitable. Sophie in her pajamas because he hadn't had the energy to get her dressed yet. His voice came out rougher than intended. Give me an hour. He drove to the office after dropping Sophie at Rosa's, sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, staring at the building, trying to figure out what he was supposed to feel. Relief, vindication, anger at what he'd lost, confusion about what came next. He walked through the lobby and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Diana's assistant waved him past without questions. He knocked once and entered. Diana stood by the window, her back to the door, shoulders tight with tension. She turned when she heard him enter. Her voice came out softer than he'd ever heard it. Do you believe me? That I'm sorry? I watched the meeting. Marcus closed the door behind him. You called me innocent in front of 300 people. That counts for something. But do you believe I should have done it sooner? He considered this, weighing honesty against kindness. Yes, but I also understand why you didn't. If you defended me without proof, they'd have said you were covering for me because we were involved. My innocence wouldn't have mattered. Diana moved away from the window, stopping a few feet from where he stood. I chose safety over courage. I chose my position over defending someone I care about. You also found the truth. You hired forensic auditors. You went to war with your board. You put your job on the line. Marcus's voice softened. That's not choosing safety. That's choosing the harder path because it was right. It doesn't feel right. It feels like I failed you. Diana. He waited until she met his eyes. I don't blame you. I meant it that first night. I mean it now. You did what you could with what you had, and when you got better information, you acted immediately. She nodded slowly, something in her expression shifting from guilt to tentative relief. Then her voice dropped it even lower. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Okay? That day at your birthday, when I asked if you'd marry me and you said, what if I say yes? Was that real? Marcus felt his heart rate pick up. This was the conversation they'd been dancing around for weeks, the question that had hummed between them in coffee shops and stolen moments. He could deflect, could protect himself the way he'd learned to protect himself from everything that might hurt. Instead, he chose honesty. It was real. I saw something in your eyes that day, something lonely that matched what I feel. And I thought, what if we don't have to carry this alone? Diana took half a step closer. I baked those cookies specifically for you, not for birthday tradition. I'd seen you on that video call with Sophie, watched you juggle work crisis and bedtime instructions, and I wanted to acknowledge that. Acknowledge you. The question wasn't a joke for me either. The moment you said it, I knew you meant something more. His voice roughened. I just didn't know if I was brave enough to find out what. Are you brave enough now? Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the CEO title and the professional armor to the woman who'd spent 3 months noticing him before she'd worked up the courage to bring cookies. The woman who'd fought for him, even when doing so risked her career. He thought about Sophie asking if it would be okay to have someone new. He thought about the Denver job offer still sitting in his drafts folder. He thought about 4 years of survival and the quiet exhaustion of carrying everything alone. Sometimes the courage to mean your words matters more than the words themselves. His voice came out steady, certain. Ask me again. Diana's eyes widened slightly. Then she straightened, gathered herself, and spoke with a complete clarity. Marcus Sullivan, will you marry me? Yes. The word hung in the air between them, simple and final. Diana closed the remaining distance and took his hand. Not dramatically, not with cinematic swells or grand gestures, just two people choosing each other in a quiet office, while the rest of the world carried on outside. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I asked Sophie last week if she'd be okay with someone new in our lives. Diana's breath caught. What did she say? She said you smell like cookies and you smile like her mom used to, and she asked if you'd read her bedtime stories. Diana's eyes went bright with unshed tears. I can do that. I can definitely do that. Then we're good, really good. They stood there for a moment, hands linked, letting the decision settle into reality. Then Marcus pulled her close, and they kissed. Not the dramatic movie kiss, but something quieter and more real. A promise made in an office that still smelled like coffee and printer toner, witnessed by no one except themselves. When they finally separated, Diana rested her forehead against his. We should probably set some ground rules, HR protocols, reporting structures. Marcus smiled. Already causing problems, and we've been engaged for 3 minutes. This is going to be complicated. Everything worth doing usually is. That evening, Marcus picked up Sophie from Rose's house and drove to meet Diana at a family restaurant. Nothing fancy, just booths and checked tablecloths and a kid's menu with crayons. Sophie bounced in her car seat the whole way. We seeing Diana? Really? Is she going to be my new mommy? Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel just slightly. Would you like that? Sophie nodded so hard, her seatbelt buckle rattled. If she reads the good stories, with princesses and dragons. Diana was waiting in a corner booth when they arrived, dressed in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual work armor. Sophie spotted her immediately and wriggled free from Marcus's hand to run across the restaurant. Miss Diana! Diana slid out of the booth and crouched down, catching Sophie in a gentle hug. Hi, Sophie. It's so good to see you again. Sophie pulled back, studying her with 4-year-old seriousness. Daddy said you were going to marry us. Diana glanced at Marcus, who'd caught up and was trying not to laugh. She turned her attention back to Sophie. Is that okay with you? Sophie considered this with grave importance. Do you still have candies? I can get some. As many as your daddy says is okay. Then yes, you can marry us. Sophie paused, then added with complete sincerity, but you have to read bedtime stories. Good ones. I promise to read the best stories, ones with princesses and dragons and maybe even elephants named Mr. Trunks. Sophie's face lit up with pure joy. I like you, Miss Diana. Diana's voice went soft. I like you too, Sophie. So much. They slid into the booth together, Sophie between them, and ordered dinner. Sophie chattered about preschool and whether unicorns were real, while Diana listened like every word mattered more than quarterly reports or board meetings. Marcus watched them both and felt something in his chest that he'd thought died on I-5 4 years ago. Not just survival, but the possibility of actual happiness. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the backyard of the house they'd bought together 6 months after the wedding, watching Sophie chase fireflies in the summer dusk. The 3-bedroom craftsman had a yard big enough for Sophie to play in, a kitchen where Diana baked cookies on Sunday mornings, and 2 offices so they could both work from home when needed. Diana came out through the back door carrying 2 glasses of wine, still wearing the dress she'd worn to Tech Vantage's 20th anniversary celebration that afternoon. She'd given a speech thanking the team, celebrating successes, acknowledging how they'd overcome the previous year's challenges. Near the end, she'd gone off script. Year ago, I asked someone a question I thought was casual, Diana had said, looking directly at Marcus in the audience. He knew better. He saw what I couldn't admit, that sometimes the right question is the one you're most afraid to ask seriously, and sometimes the right answer is the one that changes everything. Now she handed Marcus one of the wine glasses and settled beside him on the porch steps. Sophie had caught a firefly in her cupped hands and was showing it to Mr. Trunks before letting it go. Think she'll remember Rosa forever? Diana asked quietly. I think so. Rosa's still her Friday afternoon person. Marcus took a sip of wine. She asked me this morning if we could get a puppy. Diana laughed. What did you say? That we'd have to ask you, but I think we should. We have the yard now. She's old enough to help take care of it. You're going soft on me, Sullivan Reed. Maybe that's not a bad thing. He leaned against her shoulder. Do you ever regret how messy it got? The suspension, almost losing everything? Diana was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie dance through the grass. No, because it forced us to be honest. If it had been easy, we might have talked ourselves out of it, convinced ourselves it was too complicated or inappropriate. She turned to look at him. Sometimes the hard path is the only one worth taking. When did you get so wise? When I met a project manager who answered my joke like it was a real question. They sat there while Portland's summer evening faded into night, fireflies appearing like small stars in the yard, Sophie's laughter carrying across the grass. Inside, the house held their life together. Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, Diana's work laptop on the kitchen counter next to Marcus's, Mr. Trunks waiting on Sophie's pillow for bedtime. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. Marcus would handle difficult projects. Diana would manage board pressures and client demands. Sophie would need help with homework and comfort after bad dreams. Life would continue with all its complexity and struggle. But tonight was complete. Tonight, Marcus could look at his daughter dancing in firefly light and his wife sitting beside him and know that choosing courage over safety had rebuilt his entire world. Diana's voice broke through his thoughts. She really does want that puppy. Marcus smiled. And I guess we're getting a puppy. We're going to need a bigger yard. We're going to need a lot of things, but we'll figure it out. He kissed her temple. We're pretty good at that. Sophie called out from the yard, waving them over to see something she'd found, a particularly bright firefly, or an interesting rock, or some other treasure that only a 5-year-old would consider valuable. Marcus and Diana stood together and walked across the grass to see, leaving their wine glasses on the porch steps, choosing presence over comfort. Above them, stars began appearing through Portland's light pollution. Around them, the summer air carried the scent of cut grass and Diana's perfume and the promise of more fireflies as darkness settled. Behind them, their house waited with lights in the windows and Sophie's bedtime story on the nightstand. Marcus thought about the man he'd been a year ago, surviving paycheck to paycheck, keeping everyone at arm's length, too scared to hope. That man would barely recognize this life, would barely recognize the version of himself who'd looked at a CEO holding homemade cookies and thought, what if I say yes? But he'd answered that question, and the answer had given him everything he'd stopped believing he deserved. Family, partnership, the courage to reach for joy instead of just survival. Diana's hand found his in the darkness. Sophie showed them her firefly, glowing bright in her cupped palms before she let it go. They watched it rise together, 3 people who'd found each other, despite every reason not to, choosing every day to keep choosing each other. That was enough. That was everything.